The date is December 5, 1945, and 5 American Avenger fighter bombers take off from a runway at the Naval Air Station of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The weather is absolutely clear, and blue skies welcome the pilots as they soar to cruising height. Below them, the tropical Atlantic is a pale blue and quiet. It is a picture-perfect day. The 5 aviators are accomplished combat veterans and have hundreds of combat flying hours under their belt. The Avenger planes they fly are new off the assembly line, packed with all the latest flying gear that the U.S. armaments industry can afford. The aircraft plan a path east, flying for 56 miles to perform a few practice bombing runs at the Hens and Chicken Shoals, a naval testing area. Finally, the aircraft will fly east for 67 more miles to reach the Bahamas, before flying north for 73 miles and finally turning back towards Florida. The aircraft calculates a triangle flight course through the Bermudas, which will conclude with them back home. As the aircraft moves out to sea, however, the lead pilot's compass begins spinning out of control. Commander Charles Taylor meticulously examines and rechecks his equipment but can't identify an explanation for the compass failure. The other pilots radioed that they too were having weird equipment problem. Taylor radios back to Fort Lauderdale and alerts the tower there of their equipment problem. Even more problematic, he describes his position as being over the Florida Keys, which should be impossible given he and his wingmen had flown straight east for the previous hour. The tower radios back, telling Taylor to quickly turn north and head for Miami, but only if he is convinced he actually is over the Florida Keys. Lacking contemporary radar and IFF transmitters, the tower is as in the dark as Taylor's location. Suddenly, Taylor notices a curious silver saucer-shaped UFO straight in front of him. The object seemed to have sped towards his aircraft in the blink of an eye. Looking into a tiny aperture carved into the vessel, Taylor notices the face of a Zeti Reticulian extraterrestrial waving back at him, licking its lips in anticipation of the delectable human brain feast it is about to gorge itself on. At the same time, kilometers under the Atlantic Ocean, a fire crystal that once powered the now-sunken metropolis of Atlantis hums with energy. The Atlantean artifact, destroyed in the great calamity that drowned the renowned city under the waters millennia ago, is still working but seriously damaged. The fire crystal emits a surge of energy that bores through miles of water and into the sky, incinerating Taylor and his plane. Except the Atlantean fire crystal is too late, since Taylor and the other plane with him are immediately seized by a brilliant, swirling vortex of Triforce energy, which teleports the pilots and their aircraft to the year 3451 AD. Arriving in our far future, Taylor lands his jet to discover a world controlled by Bigfoots, a planet of the mythological ape. The Bermuda Triangle has mystified humanity ever since the disappearance of the now legendary Flight 19, but for as long as the myths surrounding the alleged mysteries of the Triangle have persisted, so too have the debunkers, who have worked far harder than any human should have to try and convince people that Atlantean fire crystals, sea monsters, alien spaceships, and time vortexes don't really exist. Now a scientist has finally pulled the veil back on the reality behind the Bermuda Triangle, and his findings, all backed up with solid data, have astonished many. Well, in actuality, they haven't stunned many people at all, and that's because physicist Karl Kruszelnicki has at last proved with scientific proof that the only mystery surrounding the Bermuda Triangle is that there never was a mystery to begin with. Much like conspiracy theories surrounding JFK's assassination, the mental programming of male models to become elite assassins for the fashion industry, and the moon landing, it turns out that good old-fashioned human ignorance, a whole lot of misinformation, and an appetite for mystery are mostly to blame for the Bermuda Triangle alleged weirdness. Take the famous disappearance of Flight 19, for example. In our opening scenario, we narrated the narrative as most conspiracy theorists tell it, and yet there are very many blatant flaws even before we get to the alien fire crystals and time vortexes. The weather, for example, was not crystal clear, and there was considerable cloud cover that obstructed the pilot's sight at points. The waves below were cresting at around 15 meters, hardly tranquil skies for a lovely afternoon trip. The pilots themselves were not war veterans with hundreds of flying hours between them, but rather 4 of them were completely inexperienced and on what would have been one of their first training flights. Commander Taylor himself was also quite a contentious person. He was known to be a strong drinker, and in fact, he had turned up that day rather hungover. Also, he had a past history of getting lost and needing to abandon his aircraft, having done so twice earlier. He was definitely not the finest navigator in the world, which maybe helps explain why he went so far off track. The fact that the pilots were not flying brand new Avengers but rather well-used aircraft certainly also explains why Taylor's compass malfunctioned, which further aggravated the difficulties with Taylor's weak navigation abilities. And there was, of course, only one documented defective compass, not four, which further diminishes the mystery of the disappearance. Taylor's pilots had in fact frequently theorized that they had unintentionally flown southeast, not southwest, as Taylor assumed. Several pilots even repeatedly advised that they head west, while Taylor insisted that they fly east instead, sending them farther out to sea. One of the pilots is even said to have left formation and proceeded west, although it was too late to rescue himself as his jet ran out of fuel. From proven facts alone, we can immediately see how many components of Flight 19's disappearance have been misconstrued or twisted by conspiracy theorists. With a true explanation of the disappearance, it doesn't seem like much of a mystery at all. Taylor was careless, took off with a defective compass, and then guided his aircraft farther out to sea instead of heading west as he should have done. Heavy cloud cover likely blocked views of any recognized landmasses and contributed to the difficulties of navigation. Mystery solved. Taylor got his troops murdered due to a mistake of judgment and surely didn't require the aid of extinct Atlanteans or space aliens to accomplish so. There is, of course, the popular follow-up to Flight 19's disappearance, the loss of a search and rescue aircraft deployed on the same flight route that same night. Once again, depending on whatever conspiracy theory website you read the story on, the lost jet either vanished into thin air, was detected being trailed by UFOs, or became the victim of another Atlantean fire crystal. Yet in truth, the alleged sudden and unexplained disappearance had numerous witnesses who all observed a fireball smashing into the water. The following morning, aircraft wreckage and an oil slick were found. Clearly, this was the work of UFOs attempting to throw investigators off track, except the PBM Mariner aircraft, which had been dispatched to seek the missing flight, already had a horrible reputation for randomly exploding, which, on a top 10 list of things an aircraft shouldn't do, is right at number 1. The aircraft had already received the moniker Flying Gas Tank by its pilots, and following the loss of the search and rescue Mariner, the Navy grounded all of its Mariners and finally replaced them completely. So a reckless commander with a malfunctioning compass turned up to work half-drunk and led his soldiers far out into the sea to crash, and the search and rescue aircraft ordered to discover any remnants itself detonated owing to its poor design. For others, this is still not enough to persuade them that aquatic Bigfoots in cahoots with space aliens aren't hurling Atlantean fire crystals at our aircraft and ships. Since the mid-1970s, Lloyd's of London has been striving to persuade the unwashed public that there is nothing unusual about the Bermuda Triangle. Lloyd's of London is a marine insurer that has insured ships venturing out to sea since the 17th century. Every time one of their insured ships goes down in an accident or poor weather, they lose a considerable amount of money. Hence, Lloyd's of London maintains one of the world's most complete databases of all maritime mishaps all across the globe. The region known as the Bermuda Triangle is a highly frequently used marine route. Cruise ships often sail through the triangle, carrying thousands of visitors to the Bahamas and other tropical islands, while enormous cargo ships cross through the seas on their way to ports in the Gulf of Mexico. A ship intending to land at the southern U.S.'s main port, such as Mobile, Alabama, must travel through the triangle on its journey to America from Europe, Africa, or even Asia. All of this tremendous ship and aviation activity is going to result in a huge number of maritime accidents and lost ships. No matter how good our current technology is, some estimates suggest that we still lose 24 major ships every year, utterly disappearing along with their people. The ocean is still a wild and extremely hazardous place for people to walk, and periodically it wants to remind us of that reality. When you concentrate significant quantities of maritime traffic in a restricted corridor such as the Bermuda Triangle, it's predicted that from time to time there will be a headline-grabbing absent. Yet after reviewing its archives, Lloyd's of London was able to show the public that this section of the globe experiences maritime accidents and losses at almost the same rate as anywhere else on Earth. In fact, they've been attempting to warn the public at large about this since 1974, and in a fully predictable way, most people continue to label it false news. The deep state, in this example, a genuine deep state under the waters known as Atlantis, is definitely to blame. Briefly, another argument which was at least scientific in character, was suggested for the loss of ships and aircraft over the triangle. This idea argues that large discharges of methane gas, trapped under the first few layers of soil at the bottom of the ocean, might be responsible for sinking ships and dumping aircraft out of the sky. Such a big discharge of methane might in reality form a swarm of bubbles just below a ship, which would destroy its buoyancy and cause the ship to rapidly sink. Imagine one big bubble gently rising to the surface, with a spacecraft in the very center of it, until it breaks to the surface and explodes. With no ocean below it, the ship plummets into the empty air void, and the water smashes down above it, quickly sinking the ship. In a very similar fashion, this is what the theorists say occurs to ships in the triangle. The methane, however, may ascend for tens of thousands of feet, and when it comes into contact with superheated jet exhaust, it can explode. The resultant explosion might damage jet engines and force aircraft to crash out of the sky. The notion is really perfectly conceivable and highly realistic, but experts believe that the last large release of subsea methane in the region happened around 15,000 years ago. It turns out that the only true mystery surrounding the Bermuda Triangle is why there's a mystery left to begin with. The facts and the data have been publicly accessible since the mid-1970s, and eminent scientists have discredited the whole enigma frequently throughout the previous few decades. In the end, it appears people just appreciate having a good mystery, and living in a world with no unexplained circumstances, alien spaceships, and Atlantean fire crystals may be too monotonous for some. What do you believe is the true root of the Bermuda Triangle mystery? Is there anything else out there that we could be overlooking? Tell us your hypothesis in the comments. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.